she found him bleeding in the alley behind her diner, begging her not to call for help, against every instinct that screamed inside her. Evelyn Brooks dragged the stranger upstairs and saved his life. What she didn't know was that the man she'd just shown mercy to was the head of the city's most dangerous crime family, and the tattoo on his wrist matched the one in her dead husband's police file. The city of Pittsburgh was bone cold on that late autumn night. A thin fog hung like a mourning veil around streets that had long gone to sleep. The clock struck 11:43 when Evelyn turned off the kitchen lights at Brooks' Diner, the small restaurant that had been her entire world, and her son's, for almost 4 years. It had been a long day. Like every other, waiting tables, checking inventory, and running up and down the stairs to make sure Noah was finishing his homework upstairs. He had just turned 9 last month, and he was the only reason she still found the strength to keep moving forward since David, her husband, was gone. When she pulled down the steel shutter and locked it tight, the metal's sharp screech echoed through the empty alley like a warning. Pittsburgh at night was no longer safe, but Evelyn had learned to live with that quiet fear. She slipped the keys into her coat pocket, walking briskly toward the parking lot behind the building, when a sound broke through the silence, a groan soft, almost swallowed by the wind and the slow drip of water from an old drainpipe. Evelyn froze. She turned her head toward the large trash bin against the stained brick wall. Her eyes narrowed, straining to adjust to the weak pool of light from a distant street lamp. As she stepped closer, a hoarse voice rose, barely more than a whisper but heavy with desperation. "Don't call anyone. I just need a few minutes." Evelyn stopped cold. In front of her was a tall man lying on his side, back against the wall, blood blooming across his dark coat. His left hand clutched his abdomen where the stain spread wider with every breath, while his right hand lifted slightly as if to show he carried no weapon. For a heartbeat, every nerve in Evelyn's body screamed for her to run, to call the police, to stay out of this. But those eyes, pale gray, exhausted and defeated, pulled her in, binding her to the compassion she'd tried so hard to bury beneath years of loss and survival. No one but David would have understood that feeling. He had always believed that not everyone was entirely bad, that sometimes a small act of grace could save a soul. And Evelyn, though her heart was scarred, had never truly stopped believing that. She bit her lip, took a step back, then turned sharply, sprinted to the back door of the diner, unlocked it, and ran back out to him. He was heavier than she'd expected, his breath ragged, his body cold as stone. Each step up the stairs was a battle between fear and courage, between suspicion and an unexplainable trust. Yet somehow, she managed to drag him through the kitchen, down the narrow hallway, and into the cramped apartment above. She eased him onto the sofa, flicked on the light, and grabbed the first aid kit she often used when Noah scraped his knees. When she lifted his sleeve to check the wound, her hand froze. On his left wrist was a faded tattoo, a serpent coiled around a dagger. Evelyn's gaze locked onto it, unable to look away, because she had seen it before in the case file from the night David never came home. If you're still here with Evelyn, perhaps you can feel the chill of that Pittsburgh alley and the tightening of her chest as she recognized the mark, a ghost from a past that never truly slept. Stories like this, where kindness collides with fate and the darkness inside human hearts, continue every day on our channel. Subscribe, like, and share this video so you won't miss the next journey into love and redemption. And where are you listening from tonight? Comment your city or country below, and let me know that Evelyn's story has reached your heart wherever you are in the world. Evelyn stared at the tattoo as if it had pulled her backward in time, back to that dawn when someone knocked on her door and 2 officers stood there with faces heavy as stone. They didn't have to say much. One look was enough for her to know that David would never be coming home again. They had found him in an abandoned warehouse, killed by an organized crime group, and the only clue left at the scene was an image, an exact copy of the tattoo that now lay right before her eyes. Her throat tightened, her hands trembled, while the man groaned softly. "I need medicine or anything to stop the bleeding," he murmured, his voice weak but no longer pleading, just a quiet acknowledgement that he was standing at the edge of life. Evelyn rose unsteadily and hurried to the small kitchen, pulling out her medical box before returning to the living room. Every rational thought screamed that this was a mistake. She didn't know who he was, why he was here, or why he bore the same mark as the men who had taken David's life. Yet her heart pounded not only from fear but from something else, something wordless. An instinct that refused to let her abandon him to die alone in the dark. She carefully cut away the blood-soaked coat, cleaned the wound on his abdomen, and saw that it was deep but not fatal if treated quickly. Using saline, she rinsed it, wrapped it, and injected a mild painkiller she kept for Noah's high fevers. When the needle touched his skin, he winced but made no sound, only clenched his fist and turned his face away. Under the dim amber glow of the ceiling light, Evelyn noticed an old scar running from his neck to his shoulder, the kind that comes from a blade or a near-fatal wound. Her instinct told her he was not an ordinary man. He had seen things most people could never imagine. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. The man looked at her, his eyes clouded from blood loss yet still sharp with caution. "Jack Callahan." Evelyn didn't react, but she knew instantly it was a lie. The hesitation, the flicker in his eyes, the way he asked nothing about where he was, all of it spoke of someone used to hiding. She said nothing more. "Not yet. I just need to rest a little. Then I'll go," he murmured, his voice steadier now. Evelyn nodded, gathered the bloodied bandages, dropped them into a trash bag, and wiped down the table and floor with the same disinfectant she used after every shift. Her movements were firm, deliberate, as if scrubbing the chaos from her mind. When she turned back, he had fallen asleep. Though she had only treated him briefly, his body trembled faintly from blood loss and cold. She fetched a thin blanket and laid it over him, then sank into the armchair across from the sofa. Her fingers interlaced tightly. She couldn't stop her gaze from drifting to his left wrist, where the serpent and dagger seemed to pulse faintly under the skin. A cruel reminder of fate's irony. She had no idea what she would say when he woke, or what danger might follow this night. But one thing she knew for certain: if David were still alive, if he were watching her from somewhere beyond, he wouldn't have blamed her for saving a life. And in that strange quiet, with the city hushed outside and her heart pounding in the dim light, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years, a moment she couldn't explain. Born not from duty or instinct, but from a fragile thread connecting past and present. Loss and the faint, trembling possibility of forgiveness. She heard the soft creak of footsteps on the old wooden floor and turned sharply. Noah was standing in the doorway of his bedroom, clutching his worn-out stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hoppy, his sleepy eyes blinking beneath the dim yellow light. He rubbed his eyes and glanced around the living room, where the stranger still lay motionless on the sofa, his arm bandaged, a thin blanket drawn across his chest. "Mom, who is that?" Noah whispered, his voice barely audible but laced with curiosity and a hint of fear. Evelyn rose and walked toward him, gently resting her hand on his shoulder, her voice lowered as if not to wake the past lying only a few feet away. "Someone who got hurt. I'm just helping him a little. And then he'll go." Noah looked up at her, his small face clouded with doubt. He probably didn't remember the night the police came to tell them his father would never come home again, but the echoes of that trauma still lingered in his mother's startled awakenings. In the quiet sobs she thought he couldn't hear from the kitchen, Evelyn knew her son felt things deeply for his age, in ways that sometimes frightened her. But he didn't ask another question. He just tightened his grip on Mr. Tighthead, Hoppy, and returned to his room, closing the door softly, as though he already understood that some questions weren't ready to be answered. Evelyn went back to the sofa and looked quietly at the man she had just pulled back from the edge of death. In the weak light, his features came into sharper focus, the square jaw, the stubble darkening his chin, the heavy eyelids. He didn't look like a drifter, nor an addict. There was something about him that wouldn't let you look once and forget. A kind of weathering, a mark left by time. She noticed the calluses on his left hand like someone who had spent years holding a gun. Evelyn took a small chair and sat across from him, her eyes never leaving the faint tattoo beneath the bandage. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to quiet the dizziness curling through her head. When she opened them again, Jack, or whatever his real name was watching her. He said nothing, just looked, but it was enough to make her feel as though he could see straight through her. "Thank you for not leaving me out there." His voice was still hoarse, but steadier now. Evelyn didn't reply. She only nodded to Rose and walked to the kitchen to pour him a glass of warm water. When she handed it to him, her hand trembled. She wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from the tide of emotions pressing against her ribs. He took the glass and drank slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I won't hurt you or your son," he said. This time, Evelyn lifted her gaze to meet his. She didn't answer, but the tension in her shoulders and the way her fingers clenched gave her away. He nodded faintly, as if understanding that reassurance meant little in moments like this. A man bearing the same tattoo as her husband's killer, showing up behind her diner in the middle of the night. Wounded and unwilling to call the police, there was no explanation that could make her feel safe. And yet, what unsettled her most wasn't his words, but his eyes that had seen too much, burdened by exhaustion, and strangely enough, carrying a sorrow that mirrored her own. Noah opened his door again, this time stepping into the living room. He moved carefully, stopping just behind his mother, and whispered, "Can he stay? It's cold." Evelyn turned to look at her son, her throat tightening. She nodded, though she wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. Her gaze shifted back to the stranger on the couch, and she wondered whether she had just brought danger into her home, or if, somehow, she had opened the door to a secret she was never meant to face. When she turned off the lights and led Noah back to his room, Evelyn knew one thing for certain: tonight, everything had changed. Not just because there was a wounded man sleeping in her living room, but because, for the first time in years, the past had come knocking, and this time, she could no longer run from it. The morning light slipped through the thin curtains, spilling a pale glow across the silent living room. Evelyn stood in the kitchen, stirring her coffee without drinking, her eyes fixed on the man sitting quietly on the sofa, a blanket pulled over his legs. He had been awake for a while, calm and restrained, saying nothing, simply studying the small apartment as though trying to guess what might come next. Evelyn stepped out, set the mug down on the table in front of him, and asked without preamble, "What's your real name?" The man reached for the coffee, his gaze unfocused for a few seconds before he answered in the same rough, low tone he'd used the night before. "My name is Jack Callahan." Evelyn frowned slightly. He hadn't changed his answer. "Jack Callahan?" she repeated slowly. "Sounds like a cowboy movie character." He gave a faint, dry chuckle. "Yeah, I know. My father loved westerns. That's why he picked it." Evelyn said nothing more, but something inside her shifted out of place. The look in his eyes last night hadn't belonged to someone raised on westerns and quiet childhoods. It was the look of a man who had lived inside violence, surrounded by shadows that no ordinary name could conceal. "Where are you from?" she asked again. Gentler now. "Buffalo. New York," he replied. "I used to work in freight shipping for a small company. Got caught in the wrong place when a few homeless guys attacked me." Evelyn sat across from him, her arms folded, eyes steady. "Homeless men carrying military knives and stabbing you more than once?" He met her eyes for a brief moment, then shrugged, his tone dropping. "Not all homeless people are harmless. I think they were high. I don't remember much, just that I ran and ended up collapsing here." Evelyn didn't reply, but her gaze sharpened. Over the years, she had learned to listen not only with her ears but with every pause, every flicker of expression between sentences. And this man, Jack, or whoever he was spinning a story, one carefully constructed. It wasn't impossible, but it lacked the casual truth of lived experience. The way he avoided her eyes when speaking of his past, the way he sidestepped her question about why he was in this city at all, and most of all, that scar across his shoulder, that tattoo, those were not the marks of an ordinary delivery man. "Do you have anyone I can contact? A wife? Children? Anyone?" she asked. He shook his head without hesitation. No one. I'm the last of my family. Evelyn nodded as if accepting his answer. But inside her, something had begun to stir. The instinct of a woman who had lost her husband to violence warned her that trust was dangerous. She knew she was harboring someone who might be a threat, and yet she couldn't bring herself to send him away. There was something in his eyes, a wound poorly hidden, a sorrow too familiar that made her hesitate. When Noah woke and padded into the room, the man straightened. Adjusting the blanket, the boy didn't seem afraid. He simply studied him with open curiosity before turning to his mother. Is he staying for breakfast? Mom? Evelyn looked from her son to the man. Would you like to stay a little longer? Jack Callahan? The man met her gaze. And for the first time, something like gratitude flickered there, tinged with caution. He nodded. Evelyn rose and walked back toward the kitchen. But she already knew. From this moment on, she would watch every word he spoke, every small gesture he made. She didn't believe the name Jack Callahan was real. And she was certain of one thing, whatever truth lay behind those eyes. It would reveal itself sooner or later. Noah sat at the corner of the table by the window, where the morning light slipped through the thin curtains and cast long stripes across the old wooden surface. He bent over his drawing, his small hand moving swiftly as colored pencils glided over the white paper. From the kitchen, Evelyn watched him through the curl of steam rising from the coffee pot, her chest tightening when she noticed how unusually quiet he was. He hadn't asked questions about Mr. Jack like most children might have. He didn't chatter or make up stories during breakfast. He only looked at the stranger with a deep, unreadable gaze, then turned back to his drawing in silence. Evelyn walked softly toward him and leaned over to see what he was sketching. She expected something familiar, maybe a Lego robot, or the red truck he loved so much. But what she saw stopped her cold. It was a picture drawn in black and red crayons. 3 men stood beside a large gray vehicle. One of them bore a tattoo on his wrist, a serpent coiled around a dagger almost identical to the one she had seen the night before. Red streaks covered the side of the vehicle, as if a shootout had just taken place. Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. She forced her voice to remain calm. What are you drawing? Sweetheart? Noah didn't look up. He spoke softly, almost in a whisper. I dreamed it. They were in my dream last night. Their truck stopped somewhere dark. Someone was yelling. Evelyn picked up the paper, her fingers trembling slightly. She sat down across from her son, her eyes fixed on the tattoo detail. It couldn't be coincidence. Noah had never seen that tattoo. Jack had kept his arm bandaged the entire time, and she was sure she hadn't exposed it. She had also never shown her son anything related to David's case. How could he have drawn it so precisely? She stood and walked into the living room, where Jack sat on the sofa watching the morning news at low volume. His eyes were on the screen, but his thoughts were clearly elsewhere. Evelyn approached, handed him a glass of water, and glanced at his left arm resting outside the blanket. Beneath the loosened bandage, part of the tattoo showed through, faint but unmistakable. The moment he noticed her gaze, he pulled the blanket up to cover it. But too late. Evelyn said nothing. She turned back to the kitchen, her heart caught between 2 opposing urges. One part of her wanted to call the police right now. The other whispered that she needed to know more to understand before surrendering the truth to someone else's judgment. When she returned to the table, Noah had added another detail to his drawing, a small box on the floor beside a man lying motionless. He didn't speak. He just handed her the page and looked up, his wide eyes reflecting a worry he couldn't yet put into words. Evelyn smoothed his hair and tried to smile, hoping to calm him, but deep inside, she knew something was closing in. Noah had never dreamed of things like this before, and when intuition and evidence aligned so sharply in daylight, Evelyn understood that Jack Callahan wasn't just a liar. He carried a piece of her own past, a past that had never truly ended, a wound still bleeding beneath a healed scar. That night, after cleaning the kitchen and putting Noah to bed, she stood in the doorway of the living room, watching him lie on the sofa, turned toward the wall. In her hand was her son's drawing, folded neatly like an unsent letter. She didn't step closer or call his name. She simply stood there, for a long time. In the dim glow of the lamp, and the steady ticking of the clock, waiting for something to break, or perhaps waiting for the courage to be the one who would begin peeling back the layers of deceit, one by one, until the raw truth stood exposed in the light. Whatever it might be. Rain fell all afternoon, heavy drops tapping against the kitchen window, like the steady knock of memory. Evelyn hadn't spoken to Jack the entire day. She tended to Noah, cleaned the diner, and every so often glanced at the man sitting silently in the corner of the living room, motionless as a shadow. He didn't speak either, as though he knew she was thinking through something inevitable, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer be possible. When night came and Noah was fast asleep, Evelyn poured 2 cups of hot tea and set one on the table in front of him. She sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her cup, her gaze calm but deep and steady. "I know you're hiding something," she began, not as an accusation, but as an undeniable truth. "Your name isn't Jack Callahan. And that tattoo, I've seen it before. In my husband's case file. David Brooks. Ivry." Jack looked up. For the first time since she had brought him home, his eyes met hers direct, unguarded, stripped of pretense. The silence between them stretched. Then he gave a slow nod. "I can't lie anymore," he said hoarsely. "My name is Adrian Russo." Evelyn froze. The name carried a darkness she remembered all too well, a name that had filled the news for months after David's death. The Russo family, a Mafia lineage that had ruled the city's East Side underground for more than 3 decades, tied to smuggling, extortion, money laundering, and a long trail of disappearances that had never been solved. "I was part of that family," he said quietly. "Not by choice. I was born into it, raised in violence and silence. I was the one my uncle, Vincent Russo, sent to fix problems. But I got tired of all of it. I wanted out. Everything started falling apart the moment I met David." Evelyn's brow furrowed. Hearing her husband's name from his lips was like being struck in the chest. Her fingers tightened around the cup. "David was the only one who ever faced me without fear or force." Adrian continued. "When he found out I was involved in one of our so-called enforcement jobs, he didn't arrest me. He approached me like a human being. He said, 'You weren't born for this.' I thought he was naive, but I couldn't forget the look in his eyes." Adrian paused, swallowing hard, as though forcing himself to say what had been buried for years. "I started keeping records of everything my family did. Photos, documents, recordings. I knew if they found out, I wouldn't live long. But I figured if I died, at least something good might come of it. David discovered what I was doing, but instead of turning me in, he offered to help. He said he'd protect me if I testified. We only met 3 times. The 4th was the last." "Great." Evelyn's chest tightened. Her breath caught. Details the police had never revealed. Questions that had haunted her for years now began to align piece by painful piece from the mouth of the man who had once been on the other side. "They found out David was meeting me," Adrian said. "They set us up. They didn't kill him right away. They let him think he'd gotten me out safely. Then they blew up the warehouse while we were still inside. I was thrown out through the back door. David." His voice broke. He bowed his head, his hands trembling. "I tried to pull him out, but I wasn't fast enough." End of this. Evelyn no longer knew what she felt, anger rising, only to be drowned by something deeper, heavier. She stood and turned away so he wouldn't see the tears forming in her eyes. She had waited years for an explanation, but never imagined it would come from a man like Adrian Russo. "Why are you here now?" she asked, her back still to him. "I'm running," he said simply. "And I thought I was going to die in that alley. But you pulled me back. You saved me just like David once did. Maybe I owe both of you something." End quote. Evelyn didn't turn around. But deep inside, she knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The truth, no matter how painful, had just opened its first door. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She sat alone in the kitchen, the faint yellow light washing over her tired face, the cup of tea in her hands long gone cold. Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside her chest, another storm raged without end. Adrian's confession had carved into her like a blade, slicing open the corners of her heart she had spent years trying to seal shut. He was part of the world that had stolen David from her, and yet, he was also the only person who could bring her the truth she had once longed for, so desperately it nearly destroyed her. She closed her eyes, trying to picture David's face that last morning before he left. He had kissed her forehead, hugged Noah tightly, and walked out the door wearing that familiar, easy smile. No one knew it would be the last time. She had lived with that unfinished moment for nearly a decade, and every night the ache returned as sharp and fresh as ever. Now, one who had stood on the opposite side, was sitting in her home, carrying both the weight of his guilt and the faint glimmer of redemption. What was she supposed to do? Hand him over to the police? Let them follow the trail and finally bring down the Russo family? Or stay silent, to protect Noah, to keep their fragile life from being swallowed by another storm? Evelyn pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. She had already lost everything once, and she wasn't sure she could survive losing again. But the moment she saw that tattoo, the moment Adrian spoke David's name, something inside her shifted. There was something in his eyes she couldn't ignore. It wasn't the look of a killer, it was the look of a man crushed beneath his own burdens, waiting for someone, anyone, to forgive him so he could finally breathe. Near dawn, when the light outside was still dim and uncertain, Evelyn rose and walked slowly into the living room. Adrian sat there, his back against the sofa, eyes open but hollow, as if he too hadn't slept. He didn't ask what she'd decided. He didn't defend himself. He just watched her quietly. "Do you have any papers?" Evelyn asked, her voice low but steady. Adrian nodded, pulling a worn leather wallet from his pocket. Inside was an ID card with the false name Jack Callahan. She took it, studied it for a moment, then handed it back. "You're not leaving this place until I know exactly what's going on," she said. "I don't know why I'm doing this, but I think David would have done the same." "Okay." Adrian didn't respond right away. His eyes glistened faintly, but he only nodded slowly, carefully, as though afraid that even movement might shatter the fragile understanding between them. Evelyn turned away and poured 2 cups of coffee. Her heart was still a tangle of doubt and fear. But beneath the confusion, one truth had become clear. If David had once believed in second chances, if he had believed that even those who lived in the shadows could still be saved, then today, she would carry that belief for him, not because she was weak, but because she was tired of silence. She needed the truth. She needed to see justice called by its right name. And if that meant sheltering Adrian Russo, if that meant beginning something reckless and dangerous, she would accept it. Because sometimes, the only act that can save a dying soul is the one that makes no sense at all. When Noah woke and shuffled into the kitchen, his hair a messy halo, his eyes still heavy with sleep, he saw his mother sitting across from the stranger at the table. They weren't speaking, just quietly drinking their coffee in a brief, fragile peace that all 3 of them knew wouldn't last. But for Evelyn, it was a beginning, and whatever waited beyond it, she would see it through to the end. The 3rd morning of the week began with a pounding on the door downstairs, sharp and insistent, jolting Evelyn as she prepared breakfast for Noah. She froze, her eyes darting toward the living room where Adrian sat, reading an old newspaper she had kept to line the kitchen shelves. He heard it too. In an instant, his posture shifted, his expression tightening into the alertness of someone who had spent a lifetime watching for danger. Evelyn said nothing, just gestured toward the storage room behind the kitchen. Without a sound, Adrian moved, vanishing into the narrow space where she kept dry goods and old cookware. The knocking came again, louder this time, followed by a commanding voice. "Pittsburgh Police. Open up." As a grated, Evelyn swallowed hard, forcing her heartbeat into rhythm, and walked quickly down the stairs. When she opened the metal door, 2 officers stood outside, raincoats glistening with morning damp. The taller one held out his badge. "We need to ask you a few questions about an incident that took place in this area specifically." "Saturday night," Evelyn nodded, keeping her tone steady. Of course. Please. Come in. If once, they stepped inside. The younger officer scanned the diner, taking in the checkered floor and spotless counters, while the older one set a briefcase on the table. Were you working that night? Ms. Brooks? Yes. Evelyn replied. As usual. I stayed late. Did you notice anything unusual? Anyone unfamiliar? And loud noises? Anything odd behind the building? She hesitated just long enough to know her pause would matter. I heard something by the dumpster after closing up, but when I went to check, no one was there. It's not uncommon in this neighborhood. 18. The older officer opened his case and pulled out a photograph, a patch of concrete smeared with dried blood. It was the exact spot behind her diner. Evelyn's stomach clenched, but her face remained composed. We found a large blood trace here the next morning, he said. A witness reported seeing a wounded man being pulled from the area, but we haven't confirmed who it was. Evelyn shook her head. I didn't see anything else. Do you have a camera out back? No. I used to, but it broke months ago. I haven't been able to replace it. The younger officer jotted notes, while his partner studied her closely, his gaze searching for cracks. Do you live alone? Ms. Brooks, just my son and me, she replied without hesitation. We live upstairs. The man nodded, as if expecting that answer. If you remember anything or see anyone suspicious, call us right away. Here's my card. Evelyn took the card, careful not to let her hand shake. They left a few moments later, but their presence lingered in the air long after. She stood still, staring at the card, her pulse still racing. When she finally climbed the stairs, Adrian was already waiting at the landing, his face tense but not surprised. They're on to me, he said quietly. Evelyn nodded. It's only a matter of time. End quote. She walked into the kitchen and turned the faucet on low, letting the thin stream of water drown the sound of her own breathing. She washed her hands, not because they needed cleaning, but because she needed something to hold on to. The cold water bit at her skin, but it couldn't erase the truth she was harboring a man who might be a witness, or a criminal, or both. Part of her screamed that she was making a terrible mistake, but another part, the part that had lost a husband to silence and to systems that always protected the powerful, refused to step back. When Adrian entered the kitchen, she didn't look at him. If they find you, she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper, what happens? He met her eyes and held them for a few seconds before answering. I disappear, and if they know you helped me, they won't let you go either. Everyone. Evelyn closed her eyes and drew in a slow, trembling breath. She didn't know how long she could keep this up, the walls closing tighter with every passing day, but she knew she had crossed a line she could never return from. Whatever happened next, she could not, would not, stand by and watch another person fall because she had done nothing. Not again. Night came earlier than usual, the cold mist slipping through the cracks of the window like a quiet warning that winter was near. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, her eyes fixed on her cup of tea, though her mind drifted far away, lost in the tangle of doubt, fear, and unanswered questions. Adrian emerged from the storage room, his hair unkempt, his face thinner and more hollow after 3 days hiding in the shadows. He said nothing at first. He just pulled out a chair across from her, sat down, and placed a small object wrapped in black cloth on the table. Evelyn's brows drew together when she recognized it, a scratched, old USB drive. Adrian unwrapped the cloth and slid it toward her. This has everything, he said quietly. Evidence of the Russo family's operations, every illegal transaction, every laundering route, the properties where they hide contraband and keep abducted victims, even the list of officers and prosecutors who've taken money to look the other way. Our way. Evelyn froze, speechless. It sounded like something out of a crime film, yet she knew this wasn't fiction. It was blood, and power, and money and death. Adrian continued, his tone even, steady, as if he'd rehearsed this conversation in his head for years. I started collecting it back in 2017, quietly. I was Vincent Russo's right hand, then close enough to see everything. He trusted me. Thought I was loyal. At least, that's what he believed. Everyone. He paused, his gaze falling to the empty space between them, as if staring back at years he wished he could erase. The more I learned, the less I could bear it. The disappearances, the girls trafficked, the money flowing straight from blood and grief. I once thought I could just walk away, hand it all over, and disappear. But David, he made me realize I could do more, that maybe I could stop it. Evelyn reached out, her fingers brushing the USB. It felt cold, heavier than it should be. She pictured the day David left, the faith he carried that he was doing the right thing. And now, the man she had once hated was sitting here, continuing what David had started. If this gets to the police, she asked softly, what will they do? Adrian's eyes locked on hers. They'll panic. Half of them are on the list. The rest will want to protect the system. If I hand this over without outside support, I'll be gone within 3 days. Take it due, Prosperi. Evelyn didn't need to ask what gone meant. She had read enough, seen enough, to know what happened to those who turned against the machine. Then why give it to me? She asked. Adrian exhaled, his gaze never wavering. Because there's no one else left to trust. I'm no hero, Evelyn. I'm just a man who's made too many mistakes. But David believed in me. He died believing I could change something. And you saved me. Twice now. I think, if anyone knows what to do with the truth, it's you. It is. Evelyn sat in silence, her breathing heavy. The tiny USB on the table felt impossibly weighty pressing against her palm. Her heart, her entire past. She didn't know if she was strong enough to face what waited beyond this moment. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. There was no turning back. Not anymore. She took the USB and closed her hand around it. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was thick, but something had shifted. An unspoken pact was sealed in that fragile stillness. From this point on, neither of them would stand on the sidelines again. The afternoon light faded early, slipping through the kitchen window in thin, tired strands that stretched across the table where Noah sat, hunched over a pile of blank paper and a box of colored pencils. Evelyn stood by the stove, pretending to check her notes and the clock, though her eyes kept drifting toward her son. Since the night Adrian had placed the USB in her hand, the whole house had fallen under a tense, deliberate silence. Adrian rarely left the storage room now, only emerging after Noah was asleep to whisper plans about what they should do next. Evelyn could feel time closing in around them, every decision narrowing like a corridor with no exits. In that silence, Noah kept drawing quiet, focused, as if caught in a world no adult could enter. He had drawn strange things before, images Evelyn couldn't explain, but she had learned not to frighten him with too many questions. Still, when she approached the table and saw his latest picture, her breath caught in her throat. On the page were 3 men in black suits, standing beside a shiny black Cadillac, an old model with chrome bumpers. One wore a wide-brimmed hat, a cigar between his fingers, his scarred face rendered in precise, almost adult detail. The second stood slightly behind, sunglasses on, one hand tucked in his coat pocket. The third was taller, his face less distinct, but on his right wrist was a tattoo. The car was parked along a dark street, half lit by the glow of a single street lamp, with a red crayon. Noah had drawn lines stretching from the back of the car toward the diner's front door like a warning, or a path leading straight to them. Evelyn sat down beside him, forcing her voice to stay calm. Noah, she said softly, did you dream this? The boy nodded, still staring at the page. They were outside. He murmured. They didn't knock. They just looked in. The man in the room was there too, but farther away. Evelyn's heart stopped for a beat. Are you sure? Did you hear them say anything? Noah looked up, his expression calm, almost eerily so. One of them talked. He said it's almost time, that everything has to go back to the way it was. Is for round. Evelyn's hands trembled as she laid another sheet of paper over the drawing, as though she could cover what was coming by simply not looking. Then she rose, walked to the storage room, and knocked twice. The door opened immediately. Adrian stood there, his face tightening the instant he saw hers. Noah drew something. She whispered. 3 men. A black Cadillac. They're coming. Adrian followed her out, leaned over the table, and looked at the drawing. When his eyes landed on the scarred man with the cigar, the color drained from his face. That's Luca Moretti, he muttered. Vincent's right hand. The only one who knew I leaked information. The second man must be Reggie, his hired gun. And the third, he hesitated, his voice dropping to a grim whisper. The third is Vincent. Dice. Evelyn turned toward the window. Outside, the narrow street was fading into the gray-blue of dusk. They know you're alive, she said quietly, and they're coming to erase the evidence. Adrian replied, his voice low and iron-hard, his fists clenched. Noah couldn't possibly know who they are. Not in this detail. Something is warning him, warning us. It's not subsided. Evelyn wrapped her arms around her son and kissed the top of his head. He didn't move. Didn't seem afraid. His wide eyes held a strange clarity, as though he could see beyond the walls, beyond the coming night, for a long, heavy moment. The only sound was the slow ticking of the wall clock. Then it struck 6. Evelyn met Adrian's gaze. We need to prepare, she said. Now. Because sometimes the truth arrives not through logic or evidence, but through the trembling lines of a child's drawing, the kind that adults too often dismiss until it's far too late. The call came at 3:18 in the morning, when the whole city still lay heavy in sleep, the ringing slicing the fragile quiet of the small apartment like a cold, sharp blade. Evelyn sprang from bed, her heart hammering as if it would burst from her chest. She glanced at Noah, still asleep, his hair mussed over one eye, his small face peaceful in a world his mother knew was rapidly growing dangerous. She padded out of the room and answered. The number on the screen showed no name, only bleak digits lined up in a row. She hesitated for a second, then pressed to accept. On the other end there was a soft breath, then a man's voice, deep, cold, utterly without feeling. Evelyn Brooks. What do you think you're doing? Evelyn gripped the phone, forcing her voice steady. Who is this? The man laughed. A dry, nails-on-glass sound. It does not matter who I am. What matters is you are holding something that is not yours. If you do not hand it over, someone will be hurt. It could be you, or your little boy. Evelyn felt frozen, the air around her thickening until every sound in the kitchen dropped away and her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Do not touch my son, she said, in voice hoarse. I do not know what you mean. The man paused as if smiling. Good. You can still protest. But listen to me, Evelyn. This is not a warning. This is your only chance to end this quietly. You will receive instructions, and if you are wise, you will tell no one. No police. No Adrian Russo. Because if you make one wrong move, the boy will disappear. Forever. The call ended abruptly, leaving a void in Evelyn's ear that stretched like an endless silence. Her hand slipped. The phone fell to the table without her noticing. For a few seconds she stood motionless, then ran as if mad back to the bedroom. Noah slept on, clutching Mr. Hoppy as always. Evelyn sat heavily beside him, smoothing his hair, and the tears poured out uncontrollably. She had thought she was strong enough for anything, but a single threat reduced her to pieces, not for herself, but because the terror of losing her child felt suddenly, horribly real. She stayed there until first light slid through the curtains. When she stepped into the living room, her eyes red and face drained. The look in her gaze hardened as if she had just returned from an abyss. Adrian stood by the window, staring out at the empty street. He turned when he saw her and she raised a hand. They know about the USB, and they know about Noah. Adrian did not need to hear more. He crossed to her with a steady process, decisive voice. We must move you and the boy now. There are places I know where few go. At least long enough to plan. But Evelyn shook her head. No. If we run, they will know we are afraid. And they will come closer. I cannot live like that forever. I will not let Noah grow up always running. She sat at the table, breath coming in ragged pulls. Her hands clenched. I need a solution. Something that will make them hesitate, or make them think they have already won. For the first time, Adrian's eyes held not only the cold of a man raised in danger, but also respect for the woman before him, Evelyn Brooks, who raised a son alone and kept a little diner, now faced a force that could drown a city, and she held her ground. Inside, though, she felt herself fracturing. She had only one thing left to lose, and if they reached for Noah, there would be no law she would respect, no limit she would not cross. That morning the sky was a heavy, leaden gray, clouds hanging so low they seemed to press against the rooftops. A silent warning that a hard rain was about to sweep the city. The air inside Evelyn's small kitchen felt thick and stifling, the silence before a storm. And Adrian sat in a chair with his fingers interlaced, staring at a fine crack in the floor, as if memorizing the last familiar lines of the place that had sheltered him these past days. While Noah still slept, and Evelyn walked softly toward the table carrying a thick envelope that held the USB drive. A few photocopied pages Adrian had carefully backed up, and the handwritten letter she had spent a sleepless night composing. And when she set the envelope down in front of him, her hand trembled slightly as she said, "If you are sure, this is everything. The police will need what you brought. But if you do this, there may be no turning back." And Adrian looked up, and the worry that had shadowed him for so long was replaced by something like calm, or acceptance. And he said, "I know, but you have done too much already," they threatened Noah. "And if I keep running, more people will get hurt. I cannot let that continue." And Evelyn watched him for a long moment without saying she was afraid, without confessing that part of her wanted to hold him back, and another part feared losing again. She merely nodded, a barely audible farewell. And at 8 o'clock in the morning, they drove to the East Side police station. Evelyn parked across the street and waited quietly in the car with Noah, while Adrian walked alone across the road. The envelope held high and his head bowed. 2 uniformed officers approached, handcuffed him professionally but without force. And both of them knew Adrian Russo was not like the others. He was not dragged in. He had come to end what the system had long ignored. And when the glass doors closed behind him, Evelyn felt the air itself pulled away. She did not cry, but hugged Noah so tightly she tried to hold on to some warmth of the man she was not sure she would ever see again. She brought Noah home but did not go inside. Standing silently on the doorstep, waiting for some intuition or a beat of the heart to tell her what to do. And then, at 10:15 in the morning, the phone rang, this time from the police department. The duty officer's voice serious but faltering, as if he could not bear telling what he must. "Miss Brooks, we are terribly sorry. The transport carrying the suspect, Adrian Russo, en route to the federal unit was ambushed at Brighton Bridge. There was an explosion. There are signs that people were killed at the scene. We cannot yet confirm identities, but we cannot find him." And Evelyn stopped. The phone slipped from her hand and struck the tile before rolling away. Sounds dulled and the words dead, unidentified, missing echoed through her like a tolling bell. And she sank down after an unknown interval, her hands covering her face with no strength left to cry, while Noah climbed up beside her and sat close, his young eyes gazing at the heavy gray horizon. And he said, "Mom." He did not disappear. "I dreamed he was in a very dark place, but not dead." And Evelyn turned to him, tears still wet beneath her eyes, but something awakening in her gaze. She did not know whether the dream was truth or simply the sweet comfort of a child's faith. Yet in that moment she took her son's small hand, as if Noah were the single thread connecting her to whatever remained of Adrian. And she rose to wipe her cheeks dry because without a body and without confirmed identity, there was still hope. And she would not stop now. Not when the truth remained unlit. Not while her promise to David was unfinished. And not when Adrian Russo, the man who had chosen to lay himself down for those he loved, might still be alive somewhere in a world trying to hide its own darkness. 3 days after the ambush at Brighton Bridge, the city seemed to return to its usual rhythm. Yet for Evelyn, everything moved as though suspended in another dimension, where time stretched slow and heavy. The newspapers still spoke of the incident as a murky mystery. The police kept silent, and she could not stop replaying the last image of Adrian walking into the precinct with that envelope in his hand. Noah kept insisting that Adrian was alive. He had even drawn another picture, this one showing a closed metal door and a shadow locked behind it. But Evelyn dared not build hope on things she could not touch. That morning, as she opened the diner's front door, she found a brown envelope tucked neatly beneath the doormat. No one had seen who left it, and there were no traces left behind. She opened it and found only a small brass key, the kind used for private safe deposit boxes, and a short handwritten note that contained a single line. Box 432. Basement level 3. Cedar Hill Bank. There was no signature, but the handwriting made her chest tighten. It was Adrian's. She recognized the tilt of the R, the way he formed his H like a man who had learned penmanship the old-fashioned way, slanted to the right yet steady. She looked at the key resting in her palm, then out through the glass door where people passed by, unaware that a secret capable of shaking an entire system waited to be opened. Without hesitation, Evelyn dropped Noah off with the elderly neighbor she trusted and drove straight to Cedar Hill Bank, an old red brick building tucked on a quiet street in the city's western quarter. Basement level 3 was cold and deserted, the long corridor lit by dim fluorescent lights that flickered faintly as if she were walking through a maze of the past. She handed the key to the attendant and was guided to the row of safety boxes against the far wall. Box 432 sat at the bottom corner, old and untouched for what must have been years. Evelyn slid the key in, turned it gently, and the soft click that followed sounded like a greeting sent from another time. Inside lay a thick bundle of documents tied neatly with string, a worn leather-bound notebook, and a small external hard drive wrapped in black velvet. She pulled everything out, set them on the metal table, and sat down, drawing a long, steadying breath. The notebook opened to pages dense with handwriting. It was Adrian's journal, a detailed record of every infiltration, every transaction, every hidden network and name never made public. There were even entries about David, their meetings, late-night talks in the car, the promise they made to expose the entire network they were fighting against. Evelyn turned the pages as if devouring them, her hands trembling with both pain and awe, because each fragment drew her deeper into the world David and Adrian had risked their lives to uncover. The hard drive was encrypted, but inside lay a slip of paper with a single password written on it, her name and Noah's, joined together, all in capital letters. Evelyn pressed her lips tight, not sure whether to cry or smile. In that moment, she understood Adrian had never let go. Whether he was alive or buried beneath the wreckage of that ambushed car, he was still fighting, still believing she would be the one to finish what he started. She placed everything into her bag and locked the box again, the act feeling almost ceremonial. When she stepped out of the bank, the light outside had changed. It was clearer, gentler, a faint sign of hope, and Evelyn knew she could not stop. Not now. Not when the truth was finally in her hands. Not when someone had trusted her enough to carry the final chance to erase the darkness that had once killed her husband and now threatened the future of her son. The small living room became the site of a careful excavation of the past as Evelyn sat alone through the night, a desk lamp spilling a soft pool of light over the notes, the leather notebook, and the external hard drive now connected to her old laptop. Everything else was quiet, broken only by the steady tick of the wall clock and the wind slipping through the slightly open window. And she had read almost the entire notebook Adrian kept. Pages dense with hurried but meticulous handwriting that mapped meetings and transactions and the tangled relationships woven through the criminal network the Russo family had maintained for decades. Yet what she could not put down were the passages about David, written not in casual reportage but with deep respect and a persistent ache. Adrian refusing to cast himself as a hero, admitting his cowardice and the failings that had cost David his life. She turned to the final page folded into the back, and inside found a simple instruction. If you have read this far, listen to the final file on the hard drive, encrypted with David's name in lowercase. No diacritics. And her heart thundered as she typed the password into the prompt. And after a few seconds, the last folder opened to reveal a single audio file named D0404, and she slipped on her headphones, her hand trembling as she pressed play, and the first voice she heard was Adrian's, low and weary but clear, as if recorded in a small room with a single yellow bulb. I am recording this so that if I disappear, someone will still know what really happened. They say David died in an explosion he himself caused while chasing a suspect. That is a lie. And Evelyn held her breath while Adrian continued, telling how he and David had met weeks before the explosion, and that David had gathered enough evidence to open a federal investigation, but wanted an additional, indisputable piece of proof to stop the cover-up. And he had asked Adrian to record a conversation with Vincent. And there was a long exhale on the recording, a confession of risk and resolve. Then another clip cut in with static and the cold, hoarse voice of a different man. You thought I did not know what you were doing. Adrian. I raised you like a son, and you betray me. Well, let me teach you the final lesson. Followed by footsteps, weapons racking, and then David's voice cutting through the dark. Put the weapon down. Vincent, you are under arrest. And Vincent's cruel laugh. What do you arrest me with? You think that recorder is still intact? And then a harsh sound, a crash and gunfire. And Evelyn flinched at Adrian's scream threaded through the chaos. David, get up. And a weak voice answered afterward. Barely there. Tell Evelyn I am sorry I could not get home in time. Then silence that stretched like a shutter, and Adrian's voice returned. I dragged David to the back door, but when I went back for the device Vincent had wired explosives, I was thrown clear. David did not stand a chance. Everything went up in flames, and they called it an accident. No one investigated, and Evelyn took off the headphones white as paper, tears slipping down her cheeks in a quiet stream, though she did not sob aloud, because David's last words shattered every layer of protection she had built around herself. He had not failed by mistake. He had died because he believed in justice, and they killed him to silence it. And she rested her hand on the mouse as if it were the last place to hold some warmth of truth. Every question she had carried through sleepless nights. Every time she held Noah and asked why his father had been taken. All of it now had an answer. And now she, Evelyn Brooks, held the final piece, and she would not let David's death become another forgotten line in a police file. This truth had to be brought into the light at any cost. Evelyn entered the federal building with a calm that felt almost unnatural, though inside she was carrying the weight of a ticking bomb. In her bag was the hard drive containing the confession and the recording of David's death, along with the documents Adrian had left behind. She had made no appointment, yet when she said she had information regarding the Russo family investigation, the entire security floor seemed to shift into an emergency mode. She was led to a private conference room where 2 senior investigators and a representative from the U.S. Attorney's office were waiting. She placed the USB on the table, her gaze steady and unflinching, and told them everything from the night she first found Adrian bleeding in the alley, to his hiding, the USB, the ambush of the transport van, the handwritten letter, and David's final words recorded on the tape. No one spoke throughout her account. And when she finished, the silence in the room grew heavier still. One of the investigators, a gaunt man with silver hair, finally broke it. He pushed the USB toward a technician with a subtle nod and turned back to Evelyn with eyes no longer skeptical, but wary and almost reverent. Mrs. Brooks, what you have brought us isn't just evidence. It's the key to dismantling a protection network that's survived for 2 decades. Evelyn nodded, her voice rough from a sleepless night. But if you use this without perfect timing, Vincent Russo will vanish like dust through your fingers. He has people inside. He can smell danger within minutes. They escorted her to a strategy room. She didn't know what made them trust her so quickly. Perhaps it was the look of someone with nothing left to lose. Or perhaps it was David's voice from the recording still echoing faintly in their minds. Together they began to plan. Evelyn would pose as willing to negotiate the exchange of a second USB, something Vincent believed still existed. Convinced the original had been destroyed in the ambush, they chose an old warehouse by the southern docks. Once a Russo shipping hub. Long abandoned now. Evelyn would carry a replica drive implanted with a tracker and a hidden microphone. Her one condition was that she speak directly to Vincent. No intermediaries. They reached out to a smuggler Evelyn had once helped during a late-night shift at her diner, a man who still owed her a favor. The message went out that night. Worded vaguely, but enough to make the other side understand. She was ready to compromise in exchange for her son's safety. Less than 10 hours later, the reply came. The meeting was accepted. Location, Warehouse 9 at the docks. Time, midnight. And the final line of the message sent a chill down her spine. Bring the evidence. Come alone. But this time, she would not be alone. The agents would already be in position, snipers on the rooftops. A tactical team stationed around every exit. Evelyn would walk into the lion's den, but under a plan measured to the second. When all was ready, they offered her a few hours to rest. She did not sleep. She sat there instead, staring at David's photograph on the desk, then glancing toward Noah asleep in the next room. Once again, she was about to risk everything, but this time not out of fear, because she understood now that light only returns when someone is brave enough to walk into the dark. If David once trusted Adrian, then tonight Evelyn trusted herself. Within her was not only a wife's love or a mother's fear, but the unbreakable resolve of someone who had lost enough to know that silence is never salvation. Tonight, Vincent Russo would believe he was regaining control, but he had no idea that the woman coming to meet him was no longer a fragile waitress. She was the storm, and she was bringing justice. Night fell as if someone had drawn a heavy curtain across the sky, swallowing the moon and every star in its folds. The sea wind swept hard through the rows of rust-streaked containers along the southern docks, carrying the sharp scent of salt, metal, and the damp rot of years gone by. Warehouse 9 loomed ahead, a blackened silhouette against the dark, its broken windows catching the weak yellow glow of a crooked lamppost. Evelyn stepped out of the unmarked van wearing a slate-gray coat, her hair pulled back, her face bare, her eyes cold and steady. In her pocket rested the hard drive fitted with a tracker and a microtransmitter connected to the tactical units hidden all around the perimeter. From afar, a sniper's sight had already locked on the main entrance. Agents waiting for her signal. But only Evelyn knew this was no longer a controlled operation. This was a reckoning, and she was the one with everything at stake. She pushed open the warehouse door and stepped into the chill darkness, her footsteps echoing across the concrete floor. One by one, the overhead lights flickered to life slowly, deliberately, as if someone wanted her to feel every inch of exposure. In the middle of the vast space stood 3 men. The first was tall, broad-shouldered, his silver hair slicked back, a black suit immaculate against the dim light. His eyes like blades of steel, Vincent Russo. Beside him loomed Luca Moretti, his scarred face half-shadowed, a cigar burning red between gnarled fingers. The third, Reggie, wore dark glasses even at night, his stance casual, one hand resting lazily on the gun at his hip. Evelyn stopped 10 paces away and met Vincent's eyes. I came alone, and I brought what you wanted. She pulled the hard drive from her coat pocket and held it up for him to see. Vincent smiled a slow, amused curve of his lips. Mrs. Brooks, I must admit you're braver than I expected. A single mother walking in here by herself. Do you even know who you're dealing with? Evelyn's voice was calm, stripped of fear. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. What you don't know is what I've already lost. Luca took a step forward, hand outstretched to grab the drive, but Evelyn drew back, gripping it tight. I want a deal, she said. This for my son's safety. Leave him alone, and I'll stay silent. Vincent raised a hand, stopping Luca, his gaze never wavering. I'm afraid it's gone too far for that. You know too much. And Adrian Russo, he made us look weak. That has to be corrected." End quote. A chill ran through her spine. Before she could react, a hand clamped down on her wrist from behind, twisting hard until the drive slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. Reggie had moved in without a sound. He shoved her to her knees and snapped plastic ties around her wrists. Vincent stooped to pick up the drive, handing it to Luca with a tone as casual as if reciting a menu. "Take her away. Clean this up before dawn. And check that drive for bugs. I don't want a repeat performance." "To May," Evelyn struggled. But Reggie's grip pinned her down. His other hand drew the pistol, pressing the muzzle against her temple. From a distant vantage point, one of the agents saw the motion through his scope and issued the alert. In an instant, the entire site erupted into chaos, sirens blaring, floodlights sweeping across the yard, commands blasting through loudspeakers demanding surrender. Vincent stepped back, his gun flashing from his coat, his face hard as ice. Luca cursed and dropped his cigar, while Reggie yanked Evelyn upright, dragging her toward the back door like a hostage. She stumbled forward, her eyes darting toward the cargo crates where she knew the tactical team lay in wait. It all unfolded in seconds. But for Evelyn it felt like an eternity. She had prepared herself for this night, but not for the hollow despair of being in her enemy's grip. One word pulsed through her mind louder than the sirens: Noah. She could not vanish like David. She could not let her son grow up without knowing how fiercely his mother had fought. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, but refused to cry out. Then, through the chaos, a voice shouted from afar, hoarse with urgency: "Evelyn, get down!" And a burst of gunfire split the night, flashes lighting the darkness like lightning, slashing through an oncoming storm. Evelyn closed her eyes, her heart clenched tight, knowing that the final battle had begun. Gunfire erupted like thunder inside the storm, each flash of light cutting through the dark warehouse, every shot cracking open the suffocating silence that had once filled the space. Evelyn hit the concrete floor hard as Reggie took a bullet to the shoulder, his grip on her loosening just long enough for her to break free. She rolled, hands still bound behind her. Knees and elbows scraped raw against the cold surface, and dragged herself behind a wooden crate, her breath sharp, her heart pounding not only from fear, but from the sense that something entirely unexpected was unfolding. Through the smoke and the shouts, a figure burst through the side entrance, moving with the precision of someone born to fight in chaos. The man wasn't wearing a mask. His face was pale, leaner than before, but his eyes burned with a fierce clarity that left no doubt. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Adrian. He was alive, and he had come back. Vincent Russo froze, instinctively stepping back, his gun rising a beat too late. Adrian pivoted, firing cleanly at one of Luca's men rushing from behind, then shouted across the room, "Stay down! I'm getting you out!" Evelyn nodded, tears stinging her eyes, though there was no time for relief. The firefight intensified as federal agents flooded in through the side doors, voices shouting orders over the chaos, the air crackling with radio chatter and gunfire. Luca drew his weapon, firing wildly at Adrian before charging at him with the rage of a cornered beast. They collided in a blur of fists and fury, the gun clattering to the ground as years of hatred exploded between them. Luca had the size, but Adrian had speed and precision. Every strike landed with purpose, every motion fueled by the kind of resolve that comes from surviving the impossible. When Luca pulled a knife from his sleeve, Adrian twisted, driving him against a steel column, the blade slipping from Luca's grasp as Adrian's final punch sent the larger man crashing to the floor. Without pause, Adrian snatched up the knife and sprinted to Evelyn, cutting through the ties on her wrists. "Are you all right?" he asked, his breath ragged. She nodded, still staring as though he were an apparition pulled from the ashes. "They said you were dead." Adrian helped her to her feet, voice low, steady despite the chaos. "I got lucky, and I still owe a promise." Before either could say more, a shot rang out from across the room, the bullet striking a steel post inches from Evelyn's head, showering sparks. Vincent Russo had vanished into the shadows, making for the back exit. Adrian pulled her behind cover, pressing his gun into her hands. "I'll stop him. When it's clear, get to the agent's car. Don't look back." Evelyn gripped the weapon with both hands, her sleeves smeared with blood and dust. "Adrian, don't let him get away." He nodded once. The look he gave her wasn't that of a fugitive, but of a man who had finally made peace with his choice. He disappeared into the smoke, his silhouette swallowed by firelight, while Evelyn edged toward the exit, where flashlight beams sliced through the haze. She didn't know how this night would end, only that she wasn't alone anymore. That knowledge steadied her amid the chaos, amid loss, amid the ghosts of every name that had fallen for the truth. Because this time, Adrian had come back from the dead not just to avenge, but to make right what had once been lost. Only a few hours after the gunfire at Warehouse 9, news of the event blanketed every local headline and morning broadcast. From early talk shows to political roundtables, the name Vincent Russo echoed through the airwaves, accompanied by allegations of money laundering, arms trafficking, and orchestrated murder. Yet what shook the city wasn't the fall of a Mafia patriarch. It was the revelation of the man responsible for bringing him down, Adrian Russo, Vincent's only son, and the key witness who had single-handedly dismantled the empire his father spent nearly 30 years building. Inside the federal headquarters, beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of an interrogation room, Adrian sat before 3 investigators and a federal prosecutor, his expression calm, almost detached. He hadn't fled after rescuing Evelyn. He hadn't bargained for his freedom. Instead, he had turned himself in, bringing with him every copy of the documents, the warehouse schematics, and the hidden audio recordings he'd kept secret for years. He even surrendered the passwords to a chain of offshore accounts the Russo family had used to circulate hundreds of millions of dollars through nations without extradition treaties. When asked why he had come forward, Adrian's reply was simple. "I don't want my son growing up in his father's shadow anymore, and I owe David Brooks the truth." And okay, his confession ignited a chain reaction unlike anything the city's justice system had ever seen. Within 48 hours, dozens of arrest warrants were issued. Senior figures in law enforcement, finance, and even the city council were taken in for questioning. Names once considered untouchable now appeared on criminal investigation lists. The Russo syndicate, once an untouchable empire, was being dismantled piece by piece. In a quiet basement office of the Department of Justice, Evelyn was invited to sign the formal documentation acknowledging her role in the case. She sat across from the prosecutor, her wrists still bruised from the plastic restraints, though her eyes were different now. No fear, to no hesitation, only the quiet exhaustion of someone who had walked through loss and come out carrying the truth. When asked if she wished to press further charges, Evelyn shook her head. "I don't want revenge," she said softly. "I just want the truth to be known, and for my son to grow up in a world where justice isn't a luxury." Tina Verdal's. Outside, reporters crowded the courthouse steps, cameras flashing under the pale afternoon light. Evelyn slipped out through a side exit, unnoticed. She had no interest in being a hero, no desire to become a symbol. She only wanted peace and a chance to begin again with Noah. Meanwhile, Adrian was transferred to a federal detention center under high security protection. He didn't resist, didn't plead, didn't ask for mercy. He knew redemption carried a cost, and freedom was not part of the bargain. But he also knew he had done what was right. Even if the truth came late, it was never meaningless. And when someone like Evelyn found the courage to stand up, he no longer had the right to remain silent. In a world once governed by fear and deceit, the voice of one person choosing to tell the truth even belatedly was enough to change everything. This time, justice was no longer an idea. It had a name, a face, and it began with a mother who dared to save a bleeding man in the dark. 6 months later, a soft spring breeze drifted through the quiet streets of Maplewood, a neighborhood once known only for its aging bakery and ivy-covered townhouses. But today, the air was alive with laughter and chatter. Cars lined both sides of the street, and a small crowd gathered before a new shop whose wooden sign had just been hung. Noah's Place. The sign was simple white background, black lettering, and beneath it, a sketch of a steaming coffee cup and a wobbly pencil drawing of a three-legged dinosaur. The very first design made by Noah himself. Evelyn stood by the door in a pale green apron, her hair tied neatly in a bun. There were faint lines at the corners of her eyes now, but her smile was brighter than it had ever been. Inside, Noah sat by the window, coloring quietly and whispering to his stuffed dinosaur companion. A customer leaned down to admire his drawing, then turned to Evelyn with a warm smile. "Is this Noah, the little boy from the story the papers talked about?" Evelyn only nodded. There was nothing left to say. In the months following Vincent Russo's arrest, she had received countless invitations, interviews, book deals, even offers for documentaries. She declined them all. Instead, she used every cent from her witness protection stipend to restore the old house and turn it into a cafe, a small community space for people like she once was, lonely, exhausted, searching for somewhere safe to breathe. Noah's Place wasn't just a cafe. It was a refuge, a place where anyone could bring their story without fear of being judged. One corner was reserved for those who had lost loved ones to violence. A shelf held anonymous journals filled with shared confessions, and every Saturday, Evelyn hosted an open storytelling hour where anyone could stand up and speak the words they had carried too long in silence. She was no longer the woman behind the counter with wary, hollow eyes. Evelyn had become steady, calm, carrying within her a quiet space for the past she no longer ran from. Behind the coffee bar hung a photograph of David, beside a small framed note taken from Adrian's journal. "The truth doesn't always bring comfort, but it frees us from fear." Adrian remained in federal protective custody. Evelyn didn't know when, or if he would ever be free. But each month she wrote him a letter, not to speak of longing or blame, but simply to tell him that Noah was well, and that life, even after so much darkness, could begin again if one had the courage to move forward. Once, Noah had asked her whether Uncle Adrian still remembered him. Evelyn had pulled her son close and whispered, "He carries you with him, every day." The boy nodded and returned to his drawing, content with that answer. The door chime rang again. An elderly woman stepped inside, her trembling hands clutching an old photo album. Evelyn welcomed her with a gentle smile and offered her a seat near the counter. The woman said she only wanted to sit for a while, to listen to the music and remember her late husband. Evelyn poured her a cup of tea and placed it before her without another word. That was how she chose to live now, not loudly, not seeking recognition, but by building a small haven where tired hearts could sit, breathe deeply, and remember they were not alone. Noah's Place wasn't a monument to victory. It was a testament to healing. And for Evelyn, that was enough. Late one afternoon, as the soft gold of sunset spilled across the windows of Noah's Place, Evelyn was rearranging the little bookshelf near the counter when the door opened. The familiar chime rang out, but no one spoke. She turned, and for a moment, her heart stopped. There, standing in the doorway, was Adrian. He looked thinner than she remembered, his gaze calm yet unburdened, free of the ghosts that had once haunted it. He wore a plain canvas jacket, hair trimmed short, and in his hand was a small box wrapped in brown paper. Evelyn walked toward him, unable to speak, her eyes wide with disbelief and emotion. Adrian smiled faintly, his voice low and rough, like wind passing through the trees. "I can't stay long," he said, "but I needed to say a proper goodbye." Yes, he placed the box on the counter. Inside were the few things he had managed to keep: a copy of his journal, one of Noah's old drawings, and a small note in his handwriting. "Thank you for not giving up on me when the whole world did." He explained that he had been moved into the National Witness Protection Program after completing his testimony. It meant a new life, a life without the name Russo. Evelyn didn't ask where he was going. She just nodded, her hands trembling as they clasped together. From the back room, Noah ran out, froze for a second when he saw Adrian, then broke into a bright smile. "Uncle Adrian." Adrian knelt down, gathering the boy into a tight embrace. I have to go far away, he whispered. But I'll always remember you. Whatever you draw, send it to me through your mom. Okay? And don't forget you're the bravest kid I know. In that instant, Evelyn understood. Adrian hadn't come back to ask for anything. He had come to close a chapter that had been left open too long. They stood together for a few quiet minutes. No tears, just a stillness so deep it felt like every pain they'd carried had finally been set down in its rightful place. When Adrian turned and walked out, no one in the cafe knew who he was, but Evelyn watched him go, knowing that part of what they once shared would live on here in Noah's drawings, in the gentle smiles of strangers who came seeking peace. This story wasn't just about a man who clawed his way out of darkness, or a woman who refused to let loss destroy her faith in what's right. It was, at its heart, a reminder that sometimes a small act like opening your door to a stranger can ripple into something that changes a life forever. What about you? Have you ever stood on that fragile line between forgiveness and resentment? Between giving up and carrying on? Share your thoughts below. We would truly love to hear what this story stirred within you. Every comment helps us continue telling stories that reach the soul. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next heartfelt video. And don't forget to share it with someone who might need a moment of healing. A gentle story amid this restless world. Thank you for listening until the very end. May you and your loved ones have health, peace, and joy in every small moment of life. Goodbye for now and see you in the next video.